A lot of people come up to me these days and say how fair I am. Some even say that I'm a voice of reason, which those twins and my other children find absolutely hilarious. Now, don't get me wrong, I like compliments as much as the next guy, but I find this particular compliment kind of depressing. Why? Because when I started in the news business a half century ago, working as a reporter for the Boston Globe, fairness was not something to be singled out. It was the basic minimum requirement for your job. People might praise you for your reporting or for your writing or later for how you were on the air, but fairness was what kept you from getting fired. Now it stands out. This is something that I think all of us in the news business need to think about, need to take very seriously. I believe that President Trump is engaged in the most direct, sustained assault on freedom of the press in our history. He has done everything he can to undercut the media, to try to delegitimize us. And I think his purpose is clear, to raise doubts when we report critically about him and his administration that we can be trusted. Back in 2017, he tweeted something that said far more about him than it did about us. Quote, "The fake news media is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people." After that statement, retired Admiral Bill McRaven, a Navy SEAL for 37 years, the man in charge of the missions that captured Saddam Hussein and that took down Osama bin Laden, Bill McRaven said this, quote, "This sentiment may be the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime." Now, I got to say, I was a little surprised by that. Remember, this is a guy who fought the Soviet Union. This is an admiral who fought Islamic terrorism. But when I asked Bill about this was his response. Those threats, the Soviets, Islamic terrorism, those threats brought us together. Both the president and I swore an oath to the Constitution. And the First Amendment to that Constitution is freedom of the press. When the president says the media is the enemy of the people, to me that undermines the Constitution. So I do think it is a tremendous threat to our democracy. Let's be honest, the president's attacks have done some damage. A Freedom Forum Institute poll, associated here with the Newseum, this year found that 29% of Americans, almost a third of all of us, think the First Amendment goes too far. And 77%, three-quarters, say that fake news is a serious threat to our democracy. The bottom line is we have seen presidents come and go. We will endure. So will freedom of the press.
This is Chris Wallace at the Newseum speaking at a forum titled Celebrating the First Amendment and the Newseum, at which he doesn't parse words in slamming the president. And you can credit Wallace, too, with his consistency. He's been echoing these same sentiments about Trump and the media for years, almost verbatim. Here are similar comments from November of 2017.
President Trump is engaged in the most direct, sustained assault on a free press in our history. He has done everything he can to delegitimize the media since becoming president. Mr. Trump has tweeted about fake news more than 100 times. On February 17th, the president tweeted this: "The fake news media is not my enemy, it is the enemy of the American people." And that was precisely his point. If we report negatively about something he's doing, we're hurting the country.
And Wallace's comments are made amid the continued and coordinated attack that Trump has leveraged on the media. He has spent years attempting to discredit the press as a whole for its apparent crime of holding him to account for the absolute avalanche of misconduct. Keep in mind, it was the media that often first reported the crimes that would form the basis for Mueller's investigation into his campaign's cooperation with Russia, an investigation which ultimately corroborated their reporting. And so, of course, the guy whose sole qualification to work with him is undying loyalty isn't a fan of the press, whose job it is to point out when he's engaging in misconduct. And by the way, just in case you think Trump's efforts to discredit the media by leading chants of fake news are just the mindless complaints of a pathetic wannabe dictator, they are far more insidious than that. In fact, history's most dangerous dictators use that exact same technique, which was purposefully and carefully executed to not only discredit those who attack them, but to sow doubt among all people. That even if you don't side with the dictator, that you nonetheless don't know who to side with, that you're altogether unable to decipher what's real and what isn't. In other words, it's not just about failing to tell the truth, it's about outright annihilating it. And so it really shouldn't come as a surprise that the guy who is physically incapable of not committing crimes has a vested interest in muddying facts, in peddling disinformation, in promoting his mouthpieces, and attacking everyone else. In a way, Trump's entire grip on power is predicated on his ability to ensure that you and I and every other voter in this country don't know the truth about what's happening. And that should scare everyone as much as it does Chris Wallace. Now, in Wallace's remarks, he points out, rightfully, that fairness in news is celebrated, whereas it used to be the bare minimum, what kept you from getting fired. And look, I'll be the first to admit that I praise Chris Wallace on an almost daily basis for his ability to be honest, but it's important to note that that's more of a testament to the depravity of the network that he appears on. That Chris Wallace receives such effusive praise for managing the monumental achievement of just not lying on Fox News mostly reflects poorly on Fox News. And this is exacerbated by the fact that Chris Wallace is among the only honest brokers left at Fox. Especially with the surprise departure of Shep Smith, the network is certainly more represented by their opinion hosts, like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson and Judge Jeanine and Laura Ingraham, who let their racism and dog whistles and partisan hackery ooze right out of the screen. And yet, while you and I might be aware that they're just opinion hosts, they appear in the same studio as the journalists do, behind the same Fox News logo as the journalists do, and often have more access to Republican politicians who enjoy the softball interviews and fawning coverage than the journalists do. Fox might quietly hide behind the claim that the people in their primetime slots are just opinion hosts, but for the millions of people who tune in, they might not know that the depraved, morally bankrupt, far-right talking points that they're consuming are just the personal views of a few fringe lunatics looking to reshape the national dialogue in the most dangerous way. And while I don't expect Chris Wallace to start calling out his own Fox News colleagues by name anytime soon, the subtext here is obvious. That until this country recognizes the damage that this president and his enablers, from those in his party to those in the media, are doing to this country, that we are in far greater trouble than any war would ever present. And if that means we have to call it out every single day, just as often as the president decries fake news, then that is exactly what we're going to do.